President Putin intends to keep fighting in Ukraine until the West engages on its terms for peace. He's quite unfazed by Donald Trump's threats of tougher sanctions, and his territorial demands may only widen as Russian forces advance. Putin believes Russia's economy and its military are strong enough to weather any additional Western measures. The Russian president is also unmoved after Trump ordered nuclear submarines to reposition themselves amid a war of words with Russia. Mr. Ben Aris is a founder and editor-in-chief of BNE IntelliNews and also former Moscow bureau chief for the Daily Telegraph. Is now joining us from Berlin, Germany. Mr. Aris, good to see you and thanks for your time. Are we returning to the Cold War era or at least inching closer to that?
Well, this move by Trump to put nuclear submarines into play is definitely an escalation, and it is emblematic of what went on in the Cold War, moving things around to threaten the other side with nuclear annihilation. So yes, this is definitely a negative event that reminds us of those kind of tensions from the Cold War.
Mr. Aris, who rules under oceans, the US or Russia, submarine strength?
It's fairly even. Both sides have about, I don't know, the US fleet I think is on a par with the Russians, but we're talking specifically nuclear-armed submarines. They have about 14 each. And these things are the most threatening of all the nuclear arsenals. That Russia outguns America in terms of number of missiles. Absolutely, it has like about 4,000. And it also has this new class of hypersonic missiles, the Kinzhal, which the Russians say, and I think the Americans have admitted that in the meantime, can penetrate US missile defenses. But the problem with nuclear-armed submarines is that they're basically invisible and they just sort of pop up on the coast, and then they're so close you can't defend against them. And each of these 14 submarines, nuclear-armed, they have about just under 200 nuclear warheads each. And so it's pretty much guaranteed annihilation if they come to use them.
The Kremlin has not really reacted to what President Trump did say or redirecting the submarines to reposition themselves. But President Vladimir Putin has said that Moscow will deploy Russia's latest unstoppable missile, the hypersonic Oreshnik in Belarus. What would happen if Putin made good his threat?
We'd have nuclear war. Again, it's a counter move, isn't it? By putting, Russia's already storing nuclear missiles in Belarus as of last year, and putting the Oreshnik in there, which is their new hypersonic missile, the one I just mentioned that can get through US missile defenses because it's so fast, is another escalation. But Putin said last night, and he was quite explicit about it, following Trump's remarks in a late-night comment, that Russia is absolutely, his words, prepared to use nuclear weapons if it's threatened with a nuclear attack. So, this is tough talk, this is saber rattling, and I should remind that Russia upgraded its nuclear weapons policy last November, and now claims that any quote-unquote existential threat justifies the use of nuclear weapons. What does that mean? It's not clear, but you could argue that the US moving nuclear-armed submarines into striking distance of Russia's shores is an existential threat, and then the Russians could use that as justification for a first strike. That's where we are now.
Mr. Aris, do you think Trump's decision was rushed or done in a haste? And does that give the Kremlin, or Medvedev for that matter, some fodder?
Well, it gives Medvedev fodder, but he needs very little fodder to come out with really crazy statements, and he's talked about nuclear arms and strikes before. However, I think the saving grace here is that, what we know of Trump, he loves the grand gestures, he doesn't think things through. The trouble with threats is if you make a threat, you should be prepared to carry through and do it, and I don't think Trump is in that position. I don't think he's seriously contemplating attacking the US with nuclear weapons, that this is another grand gesture by him to make himself look strong. And I think that's understood in the Kremlin too. Nevertheless, it provokes a reaction, it provokes moving nuclear missiles into Belarus, for example, and that will be responded to by the Pentagon. And it's like the Iraq War, that all these half-hearted or unserious gestures slowly drag you towards the point of no return and where you actually end up in a war. So it's a very dangerous game to play, this move by Trump, and I don't think he's thought it through, but it could end up becoming self-fulfilling prophecy.
Let's talk about the matchstick that ignited the fire, Medvedev. Once seen as a reformist during his presidency from 2008 to 2012, Medvedev has become a hardliner since Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, often posting hostile and nuclear-tinged rhetoric targeting the West. Analysts believe his aggressive tone may be an attempt to curry favor with President Putin and Russia's military elite. Why do you think the former Russian president is acting the way he is?
I see it mainly as PR. I mean, if you look at Russian politics, we've always had these hardliners coming out with these extreme positions. Vladimir Zhirinovsky was famously playing that role for many years until he died, and there's a sort of blue-collar, hard, working-class voter group in Russian nationalists that this is designed to appeal to. And for the Kremlin, it's very useful to have a message for those voters. And I don't think Medvedev actually plays any significant role in politics, despite being the Deputy Secretary of the Security Council, and he's there for PR purposes. So we can discount what he says, but it's very useful, and it's a way for the Kremlin to present what their possible extreme lines are, and he's there with that rhetoric. But he's not actually in control. I mean, Putin himself is much more measured. He has moved the bar forward by upgrading the nuclear weapons policy last year. However, he always takes small steps, and it's he's the reasonable. So it's like a good cop, bad cop kind of scenario, and that's the role that Medvedev plays.
Here's the interesting part. Medvedev mocked Trump's threats to supply Ukraine with more weapons through NATO and impose new tariffs on Moscow, calling the ultimatum theatrical and claiming Russia was unfazed by it. But here's the interesting part. Putin echoed the same thing just recently, only he said, we can't get peace for optics. What do you read from Russia putting on a brave face amid sanctions and the West arming Ukraine?
Well, Putin and Medvedev are on the same page here. I mean, the Russian position is very clear that they're demanding this list of concessions from Ukraine. Promise no NATO, reduction in your military size, recognition, sovereignty over the 5 regions that have been occupied. And they're not backing down. That's a hard line now. And the ceasefire talks that began in Riyadh in February, in the beginning, Putin was willing to negotiate. He was willing to make some compromises, not much, but some, because he wanted to deal. And specifically, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with Trump to get sanctions lifted. If he doesn't manage to do it with Trump, and Trump is actually open to doing this, then they'll stay on for generations, and Putin realizes that. But then with 3 rounds of talks in Istanbul that went nowhere, I think Putin has lost interest, and he's looking for a military defeat now, or at least crush the Ukrainians to the point where they have to sue for peace, which could come later this year. And then he's going to make the same demands. It's quite clear what Zelensky's going to have to concede to, those 3 things in particular. And he's got no interest in carrying on the talks, and Medvedev's just saying the same thing. The Russian position is very clear, painted in black and white, and they're not prepared to compromise.
Finally, Mr. Aris, and very quickly, in your view, what is that one thing that would make the 3 biggest economies in the world, that is the US, China, and even Russia, go to war?
I think it's a mistake. I mean, I think we're looking at sort of the Serbian scenario here, where a terrorist bomb-killing Archduke Ferdinand set off a world war, and it all collapsed into general destruction and death. That everyone's taking a hard line. The Russians are not prepared to back down. Trump is making these whimsical moves, moving nuclear submarines around. And you're just looking for some sort of accident, and then the whole thing will snowball. I mean, the line taken by Europe has been extremely tough, saying we're going to stand with Ukraine. They're now sending weapons. And there's a place it could go wrong, is that, say, France and UK supply Storm Shadow missiles with long distance, and then the Ukrainians decide to use one of those powerful missiles. They've only used weak drones so far, and hit something in Moscow. And the outrage is such that, they come back with destruction of Kiev with massive missiles rather than the drones they've been using now. And the whole thing just sort of collapses into general war. Or if the West supplies Ukraine with enough powerful weapons so that actually the Russians start losing, then I think at that point, Putin will pull the existential threat trigger, and he could use a nuclear bomb, a small tactical one to blow up the suburbs of Ukraine, of Kiev rather, and then again there'd have to be a response, massive conventional strike by the States on Russian targets, and then boom, again you've slipped into the Third World War.
All right. Mr. Ben Aris, it's good to see you. We'll have to end it there. Thank you for talking to us today.
My pleasure.